The courtroom smelled like polished wood and cold pride. Judge John Roberts sat high on his throne of authority, his robe stiff as cardboard, his eyes narrowed behind polished glasses that made him look less wise and more stubborn. His gavel rested beside him like a loaded gun he couldn't wait to fire. Across the room, Jasmine Crockett stood. No fancy tricks, no corporate army, just her, a thin folder of papers, and a blue blazer that somehow looked more powerful than the judge's entire bench. Her lips were calm, but her eyes were smirking already. Everyone in the gallery could feel it. The temperature had changed the moment she walked in. You could almost hear the old guard tightening their ties, clearing their throats, pretending they weren't nervous. But they were, because Jasmine Crockett wasn't just another lawyer. She wasn't bred from the clubby country clubs and polite backroom deals they all crawled out from. No, she was fire bottled up in a southern accent, and she'd come to cook someone today. Quick question before we dive deeper. If you had to pick right now, would you rather have a leader who plays it safe to please the powerful, or one who stands their ground, even if it shakes the whole system? Drop your answer in the comments. No judgment, just be real. Judge Roberts banged his gavel once, sharp and loud. A few weak hearts in the gallery jumped. Jasmine didn't even blink. If anything, she smiled a little wider. Roberts noticed, and no, it made him furious. "You will conduct yourself with respect in my courtroom, Miss Crockett," he said, dragging out the mist like he was scraping it along concrete. His voice oozed that kind of fake courtesy old men used when they realized they couldn't win an argument fair and square. Jasmine tilted her head. "Of course, Your Honor. Respect is earned, after all." The air snapped like a stretched rubber band. Even the stenographer's fingers froze for half a second before she remembered to keep typing. Somewhere in the back, a young intern for one of the Democratic reps actually let out a tiny, high-pitched phew and then tried to cough to cover it up. Nobody blamed him. This wasn't a trial anymore. This was a full-blown standoff. And here's the worst part for Roberts, the part making his grip tighten around his gavel like it might save him. Jasmine wasn't scared. She wasn't flustered. She didn't care about his status or his years on the bench or the terrified looks from the Republican aides clustered near the back like a flock of scared chickens. She was standing there, clear-eyed, steady, daring him to throw the first punch. And Roberts, being every bit the fragile old fool we all knew he was deep down, didn't just throw a punch. He launched an entire tantrum. "Miss Crockett, your legal theory here is absurd. You clearly do not understand." Jasmine raised one brow, slow and lazy, like a queen being interrupted by a peasant who forgot his place. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her silence said everything. "Keep talking, old man. The longer you ramble, the harder you're going to fall." And oh, was he going to fall? Because while Roberts clung to his gavel like a life raft, Jasmine had something he couldn't understand, something no amount of titles or robes or gavel slamming could fake. Actual, brutal, beautiful brilliance. Today, America wasn't watching some high and mighty judge reign over the little people. Today, America was about to watch Jasmine Crockett, the legal sniper, the people's fighter, the Democrat they couldn't buy, break him apart piece by dusty piece. And she hadn't even opened her folder yet. This wasn't some random courtroom spat. This was years in the making. Judge John Roberts had built his reputation the same way a termite builds a mound. Slow, stubborn, hidden behind thick layers of fake dignity. Behind closed doors, he'd long been the golden boy of the conservative elite, the man they trusted to keep their power safe under the polite cover of law and order. He wore tradition like armor, pretending every gavel he dropped was for justice, when half the time it was just protecting his rich friends from facing consequences. And he hated when someone young, sharp, and unapologetically democratic stood in front of him without flinching, especially when that someone was a black woman who refused to beg for respect she had already earned. Jasmine Crockett was everything his kind feared. She didn't come up through their country club pipelines. She didn't need their donations, their nods of approval, or their clumsy pats on the head. She came from the kind of places Roberts had only ever seen through tinted limousine windows. Real places filled with real people, carrying real pain he couldn't even pretend to understand. And worst of all, she knew the law better than he did. Jasmine wasn't supposed to be standing here, not according to their old, cracked playbook. She was supposed to be intimidated into silence, maybe tossed a meaningless award to keep her smiling in the corner. Instead, she was grabbing microphones, slashing through bad faith arguments on cable news, and racking up wins that made Robert's world look smaller by the day. The case they were fighting over wasn't even about her, not directly. It was a messy political landmine, the kind of Republicans thought they could bury her under. A high-profile corruption case involving a crooked energy billionaire who had donated millions to conservative campaigns. The plan was simple: throw enough dirt at anyone who tried to defend the innocent people caught in the billionaire's fallout. Smear them, shame them, crush them. They hadn't counted on Jasmine Crockett showing up with steel in her spine and a filing cabinet full of receipts. She wasn't just defending a client. She was dragging the skeletons out of closets that men like Roberts had nailed shut decades ago. She was picking fights they never thought they'd have to answer for. And they hated her for it. Not because she was wrong, but because she was right. The tension in the courtroom wasn't about legal theories or court decorum. It was about fear. Fear that the old games weren't working anymore. Fear that the shiny facade of respectability couldn't hide the rot underneath when someone like Jasmine stood there, fearless, and ripped it all open with nothing but her brain and her bare hands. To Roberts, this trial was supposed to be another chance to remind everyone who was boss. To Jasmine, it was just Tuesday, and as the crowd leaned forward, holding their breath, it was already clear. Only one of them had come prepared for a real fight. The first blow wasn't shout. It wasn't even a full sentence. It was the heavy, fake casual way Judge Roberts leaned back in his chair and looked down his nose like he was examining a smudge on a window pane. "Miss Crockett," he said, dragging the syllables so slow they almost melted off his tongue. "Perhaps you'd like to explain to this court why you think your interpretation of statutory law is even remotely applicable here." The courtroom didn't breathe. It wasn't a question. It was a slap dressed up as manners. The kind of slap that men like Roberts had perfected back when everyone had to pretend the slap was a handshake. Jasmine shifted her papers neatly on the podium, taking exactly 3 seconds longer than she needed to. Not because she was flustered. No, she was giving him space to stew in his own rudeness. Like a slow simmer before the pot boils over. When she finally looked up, there was a polite smile curling at the corner of her mouth. The kind of smile that said, "You sure you want to do this, old man?" But Roberts plowed ahead. He couldn't help himself. He smelled fresh blood, or at least he thought he did, and like every crusty relic clinging to crumbling power, he rushed to make himself feel bigger before anyone noticed how small he really was. "Counsel, this is not an activist rally. It is a court of law. You are expected to apply precedent, not passion." He barked, his voice loud enough to make the microphones crackle slightly. Somewhere in the second row, a conservative blogger started scribbling notes like Christmas had come early. Jasmine's hand stayed still. Her breathing didn't change. She stood there, letting the old man rant, letting him dig the grave he didn't realize he was standing in. When he finally finished, after lacing in a few thinly veiled jabs about her youth and her experience level, Jasmine raised her head a little higher. "Your Honor," she said, her voice smooth as velvet on marble, "I appreciate the reminder. But if applying the law properly offends the court, I assure you the offense lies not in my argument, but in the precedent itself." It was a bomb dropped without raising her voice above conversation level. A low murmur rippled through the gallery before Roberts banged his gavel like a toddler smacking a toy drum. His face flushed an ugly red, the kind of red that only shows up when a man realizes he's losing control in front of an audience he thought would cheer him. His next move was sloppy. He tried to cut her off mid-citation, waving his hand impatiently like she was some annoying housefly buzzing too close to his soup. "You are bordering on contempt," he snapped. Another fake threat. Another cheap trick. Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't apologize. She didn't stutter or retreat like he so clearly wanted her to. Instead, she turned one page in her folder, cool as the surface of a frozen lake, and read out loud the exact wording of a ruling Roberts himself had authored years ago, a ruling that directly supported her position. The silence that followed was so thick you could have spread it on toast. Roberts' mouth opened for a rebuttal, but nothing came out. For one dizzy, delicious second, he just sat there, blinking behind his fancy glasses, caught between pride and panic. And then, as if realizing how pathetic he looked, he cleared his throat, adjusted his robe, and forced a new scowl onto his face, like a child who trips in public and then tries to act like they meant to fall all along. But nobody was buying it. Not the jury, not the court staff, and definitely not Jasmine Crockett, who stood taller now, knowing exactly what had just happened. The mighty Judge Roberts had thrown his best punch, and he'd missed, badly. The first round was over, and Jasmine hadn't even broken a sweat. If you're still watching and you believe people like Jasmine Crockett deserve louder voices and bigger platforms, then don't just sit there. Hit subscribe. Because if you're not subscribing, maybe it's because you're still too used to watching brave people fight alone. And honestly, that's not who you want to be. Like the video, comment where you're watching from, and share this, because real change needs real backup. We have a target to hit 50 subscribers before the end of April, and you can make this happen for us. Please subscribe. The silence after Roberts' gavel tantrum clung to the courtroom like thick smoke. His face stayed locked in a stiff frown, but anyone with half a brain could see the cracks forming behind his polished act. His little display had flopped. The heavy gavel swings, the barking threats, none of it had bent Jasmine Crockett. If anything, it had sharpened her. Jasmine straightened her papers with the slow, steady hands of a woman who knew she had just won the first move. But she wasn't here to win rounds. She was here to burn the whole rotten system down to the screws, and she was about to start with a man gripping his bench like it might float him away from the wreckage. She lifted her head, met his glare head on, and spoke with a voice so calm it almost sounded tender. Respectfully, Your Honor, I'd like to clarify the foundation of my argument using precedent directly from this circuit, specifically your 2011 opinion in Henderson versus United States. Roberts blinked once, slow, stiff, the way a man blinks when he knows he's about to walk headfirst into a wall he built himself. Jasmine flipped open a book the size of a phone book, not bothering to dramatize it. She didn't need theatrics. She had cold, brutal facts. She began to read, not quoting just a snippet, but weaving together lines from several rulings, stitching them tighter than a drum over the very legal foundation Roberts was trying to stand on. And it wasn't just what she read, it was the way she connected it. With every paragraph, she linked his own past logic to her current case so perfectly that even the most die-hard Republican aides in the gallery started shifting in their chairs, scribbling notes they'd later pretend they never wrote. Roberts tried to interrupt once, tried to trip her up with a snide question about context, but Jasmine already had the next 3 steps mapped out. She snapped back with case numbers, exact dates, direct quotes that sliced through his interruption like scissors through paper. The courtroom shifted again, subtly. Whispers rose. A couple of reporters looked up from their phones. People could smell it now. The old man wasn't running the show anymore. Jasmine's voice stayed steady, never raising in pitch, never rushing. She wasn't arguing. She was building a skyscraper, brick by brick, and every brick had Robert's signature on it. By the time she closed the book, there wasn't much left of his argument except the fumes of old privilege. And so, respectfully, Your Honor, she finished, her tone the same gentle stab she'd started with, I submit that not only is my interpretation legally sound, but anything else would require disregarding established precedent, including your own. A beat of silence followed, so thick you could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Roberts sat there frozen, hand half lifted as if he was about to object, but he couldn't find a single word that wouldn't blow up in his face. His throat bobbed once in a hard swallow. His gavel, once a weapon, now looked like dead weight resting uselessly beside him. Somewhere to the left, a young Democratic aide covered his mouth to stifle a laugh. Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't wink. She didn't even look satisfied. She simply gathered her papers, clicked her pen shut with a soft, final snap, and stepped back from the podium with all the calm authority of a queen who had just reclaimed her throne. And that's when it hit everybody at once, like a cold splash of water after a long, stupid dream. Judge Roberts hadn't just lost a round. He had been dismantled, and the woman who did it hadn't raised her voice, hadn't cracked a single insult. She just buried him under the weight of his own hypocrisy, brick by painful brick. The courtroom didn't cheer, not yet, but the shift was complete. The smart ones could feel it humming under their skin. Today, the judge wore the robe, but Jasmine Crockett wore the crown. The first real crack came when Roberts gripped the edge of his desk a little too tight. His knuckles, pale and stiff, showed through the sleeves of his black robe like bones under wax. Nobody missed it. Not the jury, not the lawyers packed in on both sides. And sure as sunrise, not Jasmine Crockett, who stood poised and patient, watching him unravel with the grace of someone who had seen it happen 100 times before. He cleared his throat once, a dry, awkward sound that echoed too loud across the microphone. Then he shuffled some papers that didn't need shuffling, trying to find his footing like a man stepping onto ice he just realized was cracked. The courtroom had shifted into a different gear now. The fear had switched sides. Roberts looked down at his notes, the ones he had so smugly prepared, thinking he would swat her away like a fly. Now, they looked useless, outdated, paper shields against a woman wielding pure precision like a sword. He tried once more to salvage his standing. Leaning forward with the fake patience of a Sunday preacher, he said, "Miss Crockett, the court appreciates your enthusiasm, but perhaps you should be reminded that legal interpretation must align with the original." Jasmine didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't even fully let him finish before she calmly laid down another ruling. Not from a liberal bench, not from some progressive court. No, she quoted one of the most conservative Supreme Court decisions, tied neatly back to her own argument. By his own side standards, she was airtight. And that's when it hit him, really hit him, like a truck that had been quietly speeding toward him while he smugly sipped tea in the middle of the road. He was outclassed, outthought, outworked, and worst of all, it wasn't even close. The whispers in the gallery weren't just whispers anymore. They were little tornadoes of gossip spinning around the courtroom, gathering speed. Even the stone-faced court reporters, trained to type through anything, were stealing glances at each other like kids watching their principal get pantsed in the middle of an assembly. Robert's ego, so carefully polished over decades of rig hearings and cocktail parties, started to deflate right there in front of everyone. The worst part? Jasmine didn't rub it in. She didn't grandstand. She didn't mock him. She just kept standing there, respectful, surgical, moving the case forward with the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to raise her voice to win. Someone who knew her facts were weapons sharp enough to cut through all the pretense in the room. Roberts leaned back again, slower this time. His robe sagged around his shoulders like it was suddenly too heavy for him. His face twitched in places he couldn't control. The tiny, betraying muscles of a man realizing he had been trapped in a game he thought he invented. For the first time in his long, arrogant career, the great Judge John Roberts wasn't the one running the show. He wasn't setting the pace. He wasn't feared. He was being politely, publicly, and mercilessly dismantled by a woman he had assumed would crumble at the first glare. And the worst part for him? Everyone was watching, and nobody, not even his own people, was coming to save him. Jasmine Crockett stood there, steady as a lighthouse against the waves of his crumbling pride. She hadn't come to plead. She hadn't come to impress him. She had come to show the country what happened when you backed real talent into a corner and thought power alone would win the fight. And by the look on his face, John Roberts finally knew it. He wasn't presiding over a courtroom anymore. He was presiding over his own slow, humiliating defeat. And Jasmine? She was just getting started. There was a rhythm to the courtroom now, but it wasn't coming from the judge's bench. It beat quietly under the polished wood floors and buzzed along the walls. It came from the growing realization. Roberts had lost the grip he once clung to like a badge of honor. And Jasmine Crockett? She hadn't even needed to raise her voice. As the tension thickened, Jasmine took one small step forward. Not hurried, not dramatic. Just enough to draw every eye back to her without ever demanding it. Her presence alone commanded the room now. Not because she shouted, not because she slammed her fist, but because in a place built to silence people like her, she had stood her ground without flinching, and that shook them deeper than any rant ever could. She laid her closing folder gently on the podium. The microphone caught the soft thud of her palm, pressing it flat. Then, with a voice as calm as a Sunday morning, she spoke. "Your Honor, with respect to the court, I would also like to submit the additional findings from U.S. v. McDonnell, which further reinforces the application of honest services fraud under existing constitutional parameters." It wasn't flashy. It wasn't theatrical. It was lethal. Roberts' jaw tightened so hard you could see the muscle jumping from across the room, because he knew exactly what U.S. v. McDonnell was. And worse, he knew what it meant for him. Checkmate. Jasmine didn't pause for effect. She didn't grandstand. She simply turned over a few more pages, lining out her citations in clean, methodical fashion, stacking one unbreakable argument on top of another. No wasted words. No wasted movements. The gallery stayed locked in, not breathing, not blinking, as she dismantled every possible avenue Roberts might have used to weasel out. By the time she finished, she hadn't just defended her client. She had boxed the judge in so tightly that even lifting that gavel now would feel like an admission of defeat. The Republicans sitting in the back pews, smug and cocky just an hour earlier, looked like wilted lettuce now, slouched in their chairs, texting feverishly like anyone on the outside could save them. When Jasmine rested her hands lightly on the podium again, the finality of it cracked through the room louder than any gavel bang could have. She looked up, steady, serene, and said simply, "No further arguments, Your Honor." 7 words. That was all. She stepped back from the podium, leaving Roberts sitting in his oversized chair that suddenly didn't seem quite so grand. His robe pooled around him like a shroud. His fingers drummed the edge of his desk, a silent, frantic rhythm of a man trying to calculate a way out and finding none. For a brief moment, he opened his mouth as if to say something, maybe a weak lecture, maybe a desperate reach for relevance, but the words caught in his throat. The weight of the law, real law, the law he had twisted for years to fit whatever political mood suited him, sat squarely on his shoulders now. Jasmine turned toward her table, collecting her papers in clean, practiced motions, not even glancing back at the judge she had just broken like dry wood. The silence cracked when one juror shifted in his seat, a clumsy, loud scrape of fabric against leather, and then the rest of the room remembered they were allowed to breathe again. But nobody dared speak. The show was over. The verdict, written long before the final gavel. And all it took was one woman, armed with nothing but a sharp mind, a steady heart, and the kind of unshakable dignity that power-hungry men like Robert spent their whole lives trying and failing to counterfeit. No shouting, no chest thumping, just pure, undeniable, historical reality slamming down on the courtroom like a falling mountain. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just survived Judge Roberts' courtroom. She had taken it from him, and she had done it without ever raising her voice. When Jasmine Crockett stepped out of that courtroom, the heavy oak doors swinging behind her, it wasn't just the end of a case. It was the end of an era where people like Roberts ruled unchecked, propped up by fear, tradition, and fake respect. That door didn't just close on one bad day. It slammed shut on decades of silent rigging. The air outside felt different, brighter, lighter. Reporters scrambled, flashes popping, microphones shoved forward, desperate to catch a statement. But Jasmine didn't rush. She didn't pose. She just smiled that calm, knowing smile, the same one she wore when Roberts tried to break her and failed miserably. She spoke only once before leaving the cameras to fight over the pieces. We're not here to fit into broken systems. We're here to fix them. Simple, clean, sharp enough to leave a scar. Across the country, people watched that moment replayed on every news feed, every screen. Young lawyers sat a little taller at their desks. Teachers played the clip for students who had been told their whole lives that staying quiet was the only way forward. Mothers, fathers, organizers, fighters from every town nodded at their screens like they've been waiting for a day like this their whole lives. Because Jasmine Crockett didn't just win against John Roberts. She embarrassed the entire mold he crawled out of. And she did it on her terms. If you're still here watching this story unfold, ask yourself something. Why are you watching? Because deep down, you believe what Jasmine showed the whole world, that real strength isn't loud, isn't polished, and definitely isn't given. It's built. It's earned. It's fought for. And if you feel that spark inside you, if you feel even a little bit of that fire she carried into that courtroom, then why are you hesitating to subscribe? Maybe, and I'm just being real, maybe the only reason some people don't hit that subscribe button is because deep down, they're still scared to pick a side. Maybe they're still hoping the old rules will protect them. But if you know better, if you see what's happening and you're tired of sitting on the sidelines, then show it. Hit that like button. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from, because this fight is way bigger than one courtroom, one city, or one headline. It's happening everywhere. And if you still can't bring yourself to subscribe after seeing Jasmine Crockett stand tall and tear down the old guard without raising her voice, maybe you're still a little too comfortable with how broken the system really is. But for those who know better, those who feel that shift in the air, welcome. We've got a lot more to tear down and a lot more to build up. Subscribe. Share this story. Tell a friend who needs reminding. You don't have to play by their rules anymore. And we're just getting started.